Observations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
I've heard it said before, like, it was a very smart man named Robert Meyer Burnett who said the currency of our current age is authenticity. And it's so true.
Imagination Connoisseurs Unlimited, in association with Max Allan Collins Productions, presents True Noir, The Assassination of Anton Cermak, from the Nathan Heller casebooks, based on the 19-novel series by Road to Perdition writer Max Allan Collins. This 10-episode series is directed by me, Robert Meyer Burnett, a fully immersive audio drama mixed in 5.1 surround. We like to call it cinema, but without the pictures. It is truly exciting with a cast, well, a cast I don't believe, and I know you won't believe it either. You might see it sooner rather than later. Perhaps the first episode will premiere at this year's San Diego Comic-Con. Who knows? The crowdfunding campaign launches quite soon. We're keeping things close to the vest, but watch this space. Greetings, Imagination Connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, and the, well, as yet to be defined, existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, me, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I'm, of course, Rob-casting you Imagination Connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity. You know, this is Robservations episode number 971. And I really am very excited about the audio drama. I can't get into where we're at with it right now a lot, but let me just say, I mean, I know it's an audio drama, but you're going to wish it was a streaming series when you hear it because it's that good. And I give all the credit, first of all, to writer Max Allan Collins. I don't know how I coerced him. I don't know if I twisted his arm in his sleep or, you know, put his finger in the water, warm water. I don't know what I did to him, but the man delivered a script. I mean, honestly, if he was being paid by Hollywood, it was a millions of dollars worth of work he did for less than that. So you go, Max Allan Collins, because, man, what you did is amazing. I can't wait to bring it to life, and hopefully I will do you justice. Now, before I get into the topic at hand, I just want to say, please, I hope everyone has watched the Acolyte episode 3. Now, I'm not going to review it. I'm not going to get into it. We're going to talk about it. But, you know, I really think the Acolyte episode 3 is kind of like The Matrix. You can't be told anything about it. You have to see it for yourself. But anyway, I got a letter in the mail, and I wanted to read it. And it came with to be honest, came with a nice tip, because the Post-Geek Singularity website is down. It's been down for a while, but I did get this letter sent to me, and I wanted to read it. It's from Brett Dean. Brett Dean writes, "Hey, Mr. B. I've been a little depressed lately. And by lately, I mean since about 2009. I've recently, here in the 2020s, breached my 40s. And so time has started to slow down in certain ways. A decade here, a decade there. A mere pittance. And it's started to fly by in others. I'm still young enough that I can draw on what remains of youthful vigor to try and make the world a better, or at least more entertaining place. In spite of a lot going on in the world, I remain optimistic. If I could leave it there, I would. But I'll be honest. I'm not taking the mental game of aging all that well. Come on, man, I'm older than you, and I'm having a good time. But I'll be honest, I'm not taking the mental game of aging all that well. I'm naturally more like Tully and Soren than Picard in this regard." Ooh, Generations reference. "Yet, in what is perhaps the most unexpected part of the aging process, I'm feeling the comfort of experience and wisdom guiding me. It's almost as if time really is a companion who goes with us on the journey and reminds us to cherish every moment because it will never come again. This experience and wisdom to us is our truth, no? Whether or not that truth is just like we remember it, or spoilers, incorrect perceptions that we have our memories, like in 2004's The Final Cut, experiences and wisdom become our truth, which we can use to help and guide ourselves and others. And boy, does that feel good. I think if you use it in the right way, to help guide and inform your choices and lead others, age, experience, and insight might be what one would call authenticity. Upon reaching this unexpected Eden of self-confidence, it seems I'm arriving at a place of contentment, just as we are all finding a world where our cherished memories are no longer safe. Contentment gone? A major part of our lives are stories, and like every geek child of the 80s and 90s, I lived a good portion of my life in the imaginary universes that others created, and we ourselves embellished upon in our own minds. Now, these worlds are under the stewardship of those who have demonstrated no capacity or no capability in defending them. Defending them requires understanding and respecting the various IPs. More specifically, it requires understanding of their original literary mission and having an encyclopedic knowledge of what came before. You've said before that Star Trek is a historic timeline of a future created from a 1960s perspective. One thing I get disturbed by are those who say, "Don't be a canonista. Don't be a canon maniac." I've heard producers, directors, writers, and so-called Star Trek podcasters say, canon doesn't matter in the service of a good story. The minute Star Trek canon doesn't matter is the minute that a story or an entire show is less Star Trek. Eventually, you'll run out of Star Trek-ness through enough canon violations, and the universe of Star Trek is irreparably damaged. In the 1980s, Star Trek The Next Generation took pains to be different from the original series, but the knowledge of the universes was sound, and the stories felt authentic because the people in charge all the way up and all the way down cared about the universe and knew it back and forth. New hires to the production staff along the way expanded on the universe while maintaining as much canon as they consciously could. I truly believe to this day that any 1980s or 90s scrapes of the paint on the body of Star Trek canon was merely a function of the hurried production schedule they found themselves in. With that team of writers and a production staff like the Akutas, Doug Drexler, Andy Probert, and others, no one was intentionally violating canon just to tell the story they wanted to tell. When important IPs are damaged, it has a recursive effect. It damages the series on the air now, and it recursively impacts the universes we knew. As hard as you try not to let the effect spread, because these universes are histories, modern problems in storytelling do impact your prior enjoyment with them. As human beings, we value our stories. They inform us, they build us up. These pieces of fiction add to our stories. I think this is why longtime fans are feeling the burn of fabled franchise destruction more than recent fans. Both sets of fans may claim a high level of intense love for these universes, but only the longtime fans have the history of Star Wars, Star Trek, Doctor Who, and comic books baked into their stories and ultimately their lives. The J.J. Abrams and Alex Kurtzman era of Star Trek not only creates a bad experience for us now, it actively impacts and weakens every series and our experiences with them in the past. Longtime fandom can be a cumulative process. Recently, I heard the character of Kovich turned out to be Daniels from Enterprise. Daniels was a great character. This is dumb writing akin to Khan being revealed in Star Trek Into Darkness. Now the dumbness impacts future watchings of Enterprise that contain the Daniels character. Why did Star Trek The Next Generation only trickle in the Star Trek TOS characters? I assume that they only wanted to bring in legacy characters when they had something truly amazing and worthy to add to the story of their character. I'd venture that no one had to tell these writers to treat legacy characters with respect. My guess is they intrinsically knew the importance of the characters to the people watching and how to tread with the utmost care regarding the characters. Beyond all of this, what happened to good storytelling? Also, what happened to good science within Star Trek? One thing that I understood from the minute I saw Star Trek the Motion Picture for the first time, Kirk and company lived in a time that was relatable. TOS and the TOS movies felt real and authentic because they still made it seem like it was a miracle that anything worked. The Motion Picture Enterprise looked and felt real. it was merely a giant, slightly more futuristic space shuttle. A quote runs through my head as we slowly circle the Enterprise in dry dock in Star Trek The Motion Picture. Space is hard. The slowly moving camera implied weight in numerous forms. Nothing can be rushed. These are large machines protecting human lives within a fragile shell. When Next Generation came around, guess what? It still felt authentic. Space is still hard, but we're getting better at it because as a species, we're continuing to get better. That growth is fragile, and not everyone in our neighborhood has gotten the memo about societal evolution. Then came Star Trek 09, Star Trek Discovery, and a whole lot of garbage. It was as if Paramount took the beautifully constructed Lego version of Star Trek from 1966 to 2005 and smashed it on the floor, and gave J.J. Abrams and Alex Kurtzman all of the pieces and a bunch of additional pieces from a Star Wars Lego set, dumped them all into a parts bin and said, "Go nuts." Then, without consulting any of the experts that made the original creation great, these guys set about putting together more bigger, more betterer, and more stupider Star Trek. Oh, look, Doug Drexler is working on the Orville. Oh, look, Terry Matalas is available. Oh, look, Nicholas Myers created a whole unused series of plans for us. Nah, I'm sure we can do better. If I were given the parts of a Star Trek universe, it would take me approximately 0 seconds to call Terry Matalas, Nicholas Meyer, the Akutas, Doug Drexler, Ronald D. Moore, Brandon Braga. I had a feeling after listening to the Inglorious Trexperts talk about Star Trek 3 that Terry Matalas would find his way to Kevin Feige's MCU. All throughout the Picard Season 3 victory lap, you could feel the insecurity and bitterness pouring out of Star Trek's top brass, especially Alex Kurtzman. They took their eyes off Star Trek for one hot second, and Terry snuck in there and made the best TNG movie, or the best Star Trek TV series since the late 90s, and the world responded to it. You could feel the Kurtzman machine, I'm from the Chicago area, swing into action and try and stamp out the love for Picard Season 3's victories. Nothing official was truly touted or celebrated, despite the real grassroots enthusiasm and accolades. Then that weird internet thing happened when it's very clear that 90% of the people liked a thing, and somehow the machine gets involved and make it look like only about 40% of people like the thing. Polls show Picard Season 3 was divisive, or whatever. And then somehow the machine makes it look like 90% of people like a terrible thing, like Star Trek Discovery, when you can feel it in the zeitgeist that no one even cared about that thing at all because it sucked so hard. This carries a bit of feeling that a teacher once described to me in college. She'd grown up in Eastern Germany and talked about the general default feeling of depression that permeated everything. I don't equate the loss we feel towards fictional universes to the day-in, day-out fear of living in the Eastern Bloc, but there is something to say about the rewriting of one's truth into something blasé and uninspiring. If we value our stories and our fiction, we shouldn't let them become blasé. Alas, if all the fans are gone, who remains to advocate? Will the last one out please shut off the lights? I've canceled my subscription to Paramount Plus because, plainly put, Star Trek is insultingly dumb. It is blasé, and unthinkably, I don't care about the stories they're telling. Their 32nd century is tremendously stupid. It should be unrecognizable to us. The crew of the Discovery shouldn't even be able to speak the language of the 32nd century natives. English should have evolved into an amalgamation of languages from across the Alpha and Beta quadrants. Slang would be a series of unrecognizable references to 1,000 years of culture that hasn't happened yet. The technology would be magic, and the problems faced by 32nd century natives would be unrelatable to us. The production design is nondescript and disrespectful of everything that has come before. This, next to the storytelling, is the most insulting part of modern Trek. Trials and tribulations and relics are the blueprints for how to handle legacy Trek, and once again, it was there for anyone to see and learn from. But that is something that has again become a massive problem for Alex Kurtzman. His most recent comments are thinly veiled vibes against Terry Matalas and those who want Star Trek Legacy in Terry's very correct style and with his very correct instincts. The Kurtzman machine is once again on the move, telling fans what we really want is authentic Star Trek that's new, a little familiar, but not, like too familiar. like Terry shit. Finally, let's talk about the music. If there is any non-visual indication that Terry Matalas was our one shot at Trek vs. Redemption, it was his choice of composer in Stephen Barton. And it was a home run like anything I've ever experienced in my life. The nautical feel, the references to TMP, Wrath of Khan, TFSF, TSFS, Search for Spock, of course, which celebrates its 40th anniversary. And, of course, Generations and First Contact were magical. It kind of makes Jeff Russo's bland work seem like the Kurtzman Trek of Star Trek music, no? At this point, I'm happy to recognize I've overstayed my welcome, and my focus is about as tight as the embouchure of a 90-year-old trumpet player. I even know what that means. Thank you greatly for your time, and I hope this lets you know that we fans truly do get it. We get good storytelling. We know the value. Please don't take a break from holding Star Trek's feet to the fire or from giving Alex Kurtzman hell for the damage he is doing to the universe that means so much to us. Parting question. Who will be inspired by today's Star Trek? Who will become the inventor, the astronaut, the statesman, the woman, the statesman or stateswoman, or statesperson because of what they've seen lately? Whose truth will define it? And that comes from, he says, many thanks, Brett T. Dean from shoutsection.com. Well, Brett, many thanks for that letter. I very much appreciate you sending it in. Now, there were pictures that dropped online over the last couple days of the Peabody Awards. Now, the Peabody Awards is something Star Trek has won before. The first season of Next Generation won a Peabody Award. I want to say they won a Peabody Award for The Big Goodbye, but don't quote me. But at this Peabody Awards ceremony, J.J. Abrams was talking, Alex Kurtzman was talking, and they were giving awards to the Star Trek franchise as a whole. And I'm not so sure. There was no Rick Berman. There was no Ron Moore. There was no Brannon Braga. And, you know, Ron Moore was somebody that wrote on TNG. He began his writing career on TNG. He worked on Deep Space Nine. He worked on Voyager. He wrote Generations. He wrote First Contact. And Rick Berman produced all of those things. Rick Berman produced a lot more episodes of Star Trek than Alex Kurtzman has, or ever will. And yet he wasn't there, which seemed odd to me. Patrick Stewart was there, but none of the writers and none of the producers that worked on the Star Trek from 1987 to 2005 that really re-energized the franchise and made it what it is today. I couldn't necessarily point to an episode of modern Star Trek that was necessarily worthy of winning a Peabody. Other people smarter than me probably could. But I want to thank Brett for the letter. Remember, it was Brett's letter, and it was what Brett was feeling. Now, okay, let's get to the topic at hand, people. I'm going to get to this topic. Suspension of disbelief. Let's talk about that. What does that even mean? Suspension of disbelief. Well, in my mind, it goes hand in hand with my favorite word, verisimilitude. The quality of being real. And as I've often said, the most important thing when you're creating fiction of any kind is for it to be truthful. The best fiction is truthful because the best fiction makes you believe. And from a storytelling standpoint, if somebody who's made up a narrative or made up a storyline can make you believe in that storyline to the point where you're invested in those characters because you believe them, that, my friends, that skill set is, I think, the hardest thing to master. Because to create a fictional world, whether it's a noir story like Max Allan Collins can create, whether it's a futuristic story, pick your favorite, whether it's an optimistic or dystopian future, and you believe, The Matrix, the Wachowskis made you believe. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite moments in any modern science fiction movie is when Neo does get the red pill or the blue pill, and he gets pilled, and he wakes up, and you find out all of humanity are living batteries. I have to say, I'm a pretty savvy, astute viewer. And when I sat in the Steve Ross Theater on the Warner Brothers backlot and went to a film that everybody kind of was like, uh-oh. Look, I love Robert Longo as an artist, but Johnny Mnemonic is probably not the best thing that he had going for his career. But when we all went and saw The Matrix, the Wachowskis got us, man. Why? Because we believed. We believed because they took great pains to make us believe. And in making us believe, then they could show us things that were unbelievable, such as bullet time. And that is the real trick. The great thing that great writers and filmmakers that work in the fantasy, sci-fi, or horror space do is they make us believe. Now, you know, a lot of people say, well, okay, how does that work exactly? How does it work? Well, how it works is they show you something that is patently unbelievable, but they bring with it enough real-world qualities to make you believe in it. And that is a hard thing to do. Like, for instance, you know, I was talking with my friend Frank Koralchik, who's been shooting some behind-the-scenes making of stuff for me. And I've known him, I met him at a science fiction convention, a creation convention in the 90s, and I've known him, you know, for over 25 years now. And we had a conversation, we had lunch today, and we had a conversation about believability. And we brought up Anthony Ferrante's Sharknado series. And look, I'm not a fan of campiness, and I understand some people like that. And I said, you know, Frank, I believe that in any fantasy, science fiction, or horror story, you get one big ask for the audience. And I'm like, let's say if I wasn't working for the asylum, but if somebody asked me to make a Sharknado movie, the only way that I could wrap my head around it is if I could make it believable. And Frank was like, how can you believe in a Sharknado? Come on. You can't. There's nothing about that. I would say, well, no. And I use something like Roland Emmerich's Day After Tomorrow. You know, if you could come up with a credible way to show some weather front and some kind of a weird tornado at sea and present it in a very realistic way, and there was some shark feeding, that's probably a bad example, but presented in such a way where there's actually a gigantic tornado at sea that sucks up and creates a whirlwind of water, and it's full of these feeding sharks. So there's hundreds of sharks in this giant tornado. That's your one ask. That's your ask. You'll believe, if you can make an audience believe in that ridiculousness, and if they buy into it, and then this thing hits landfall, like, then you can do things that are patently ridiculous, but make them, like, for instance, what happens if some kids are having a birthday party? You know, there's a bunch of, like, 8-year-olds having a pool party in Atlanta, and this thing has come to shore, and when it arrives, it flung a bunch of sharks out of the Sharknado, and one landed in a swimming pool, you know, in the outskirts of Atlanta, and it went crazy, and it just massacred 20 screaming 8-year-olds. You could present it in such a way where we all know it's stupid and ridiculous, but if you chose not to make it camp and chose to buy into the craziness, I mean, that's where you get things like Tremors from. You know, I don't think you would maybe make a Sharknado like Graboids and Tremors, but in Tremors, the Graboids were your one big ask. And if you can make your audience believe in the Graboids, then what you do is you bring in as much real world physics, real world, like if they're moving underground, then you bring all the reality that this crazy fantasy thing like the Graboids would bring with it. And that's how you get your audience to suspend disbelief. You buy into the Graboids, but because if you make like sandworms on Arrakis, 400 yards long or whatever, If you buy into that and then make those sandworms have real world physics behind them, that's when you start to believe in the fiction. And that's what's most important, I think. Where is that verisimilitude? You get that ask, you get the graboids, you get the sandworms of Arrakis, but then you do everything you can to make them believable. And how do you do that? You apply rules. These fictional, crazy things, again, the more truthful you can make them and give them rules, the more the audience believes. And a perfect example of this that we have seen, it was believable in 1966, and in 2012 in Star Trek Into Darkness, they destroyed all credibility of it. Well, actually, they destroyed it in 2009, too. The transporter. An interesting, I've talked about this before on the show, so have many other people, not on this show, but on other shows. The transporter was an elegant way to be able to transport your crew down to the planet without having special effects of a shuttlecraft landing every episode. They had a shuttlecraft, but they didn't use it every episode. Expensive, so they had the transporter. The transporter was basically poppycock. But because of the way they treated it, transmuting, I mean, the question is, do people get disintegrated and die and their copy winds up there? I mean, there's all kinds of philosophical arguments. I don't want to have those today. But the reason the transporter worked is it was defined by rules. The transporter, you couldn't transport from a planet like, say, even in Jupiter orbit to Earth. That was too far. You had to be in standard synchronized orbit, a geosynchronous orbit, to transport people down to coordinates. You couldn't transport people if you were above North America to, say, Bangladesh. You couldn't do that. So, and if the transporter went down, if there was an ion storm, you couldn't send a shuttlecraft down. You're gonna literally have to send Sulu down a pot of coffee with a rope. But the thing is, that's what made the transporter believable. So, once you made people believe in it, well, then you could do things like, because of a storm or a reaction, Captain Kirk could be split into two. Or there could be a transporter reflection that created a duplicate of Riker. Or when they went to the Halkins, they went to the Halkins planet, an ion storm created an interspace anomaly. It allowed a universe tear to open up to a mirror universe, and a transposition takes place. These are crazy cockamamie ideas. But because you believe in the transporter, if they provide you with a credible explanation of how it works, then you're like, okay, all right. Lightsabers. Lightsabers are one of my favorite examples of something that was probably impossible, but you believe. And you know what? Great example of a fictional moment. Your father's lightsaber. When Ben Kenobi's talking about the lightsaber and Luke first ignites it. Well, first of all, because we all know what a sword is, a lightsaber, all right. And the fact that it has a blade, and we see, obviously, it's dangerous, but it works like a sword. But we believe in it because it's not magic. You can't whip it around, You can't, it only is as long as it is. You can stick it into metal and it melts metal, because why wouldn't it? It's plasma. It's like a plasma torch or something. The way that the lightsaber is presented in Star Wars, Empire, and Jedi, you believe, man. You believe. Because the idea of a lightsaber itself harks back, we know, it's Robin Hood. It's the past. For us, even though it's a laser sword, it represents an elegant weapon from an earlier time. It was a brilliant idea. And then, of course, Han Solo has a blaster. I mean, great thing. And of course, as time goes on, people want to do, well, let's take the lightsaber and add to it. But when it comes to things like transporters, in J.J. Abrams' Star Trek 09, inexplicably, the transporter, you can now beam somebody to a starship at warp. Well, when I was watching the movie, getting angrier and angrier, I thought to myself, okay, you've now perverted the transporter and imbued it with powers that doesn't make any sense. First of all, how can you possibly lock a transporter on a starship that's traveling at warp? How can you do that? Because it's never in the same place. From the time it took you to energize to, the ship's way far gone. There would be no way to lock on. And you can say, and here's what a lot of people I know these days would say. They would say, well, Rob, of course you can. You can do anything. It's fictional. I'm like, no. The transporter's operating parameters have been defined in pop culture from 1966 to 2008. So we've had generations of people who understand how the transporter works. And part of Star Trek storytelling is that the transporter's limitations have always provided fodder for interesting stories. Even when you have episodes like Rascals and Next Generation where the transporter causes everybody to turn into their younger selves. That's a big fucking ask. But you know what? When the rest of the story, because we've seen Kirk split into two, we've seen the mirror universe, they've given us precedent. We can go, okay, I get that. Pattern buffers, that kind of thing. Even Next Generation, when people could see when they were being transported in something like, what was it, Night Terrors? No, it wasn't Night Terrors. That's too far. Even Next Generation, not perfect. So now, I want to read an article. You knew there would be articles. There's articles here. And I wanted to read this interesting article before and I've got some great articles. This article I found comes to us from Backstage, and this was updated on April 18th, 2023. Again, Susie Woltzman wrote this, and it's for Backstage. Whether it's as fantastical as the alien realm of Avatar or as naturalistic as the ripped from the headline stories of Law & Order SVU, part of a movie, TV, and theater magic is the willing suspension of disbelief. Audiences must be able to believe in the faux reality of the world being presented to them in fictional works. Suspension of disbelief requires an unspoken agreement between creators, performers, and audiences. The creator crafts a world with consistent logic. The actors perform, you can see why I love this article, the actors perform with verisimilitude, and the audience accepts the narrative taking place within that world. This unspoken contract ensures that the audiences remain immersed in film, TV, and theatrical productions. And here's the history of the suspension of disbelief. Tragedy and catharsis. Aristotle wrote in Poetics in 335 BC that theatrical tragedy can create a sense of terror and pity in viewers. Experiencing these emotions creates a positive sense of catharsis, or purification through purging. In order for audiences to experience these emotions, the characters depicted in a tragedy must be good, appropriate, realistic, and consistent. Poetic faith. Over a millennium later, poet-philosopher Samuel Taylor Coleridge wrote in Biographia Literaria from 1817 that when writers imbue human interest and a semblance of truth into their texts, readers will take on poetic faith and accept the internal logic depicted in even the most supernatural narrative. Enjoying entertainment. Today, the phrase is used more to describe the duty of viewers and readers hoping to be entertained by fictional works. Rather than focusing on the physics-defying leaps of the Marvel Cinematic Universe or the statistical impossibilities of your average Law & Order SVU episode, suspending disbelief means harnessing the ability to enjoy the story world of these productions. Of course, audiences can only become immersed in movie magic when they don't feel compelled to pay attention to the man behind the curtain. The audience is never required to bring suspension of disbelief with them to a movie, writes Roger Ebert. It is the filmmaker's job to create it, to drag it kicking and screaming from the clenched fists of the viewer's reason. It is an involuntary response or lack of response created when questioning certain details is made impossible by the distraction of the mind. The onus of suspended disbelief lies with those involved in the creation of a fictional work. Only then can the audience take up their part of the bargain. Writers, filmmakers, video editors, and others involved in crafting compelling, believable works of fiction should remain cognizant of the suspension of disbelief concept to keep audiences engaged with their work. To do so, they should avoid plot holes. Whether it's the Deus Ex Machina arrival of the great eagle saviors in Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, the extra DeLorean in Back to the Future Part 3, leaps in logic and incidents that defy a story's internal reality disrupt the viewing experience. Avoid plot holes by establishing rules for your story world and sticking to them. That's not what happened in J.J. Abrams' Star Trek movies. He threw all that out. And for anyone who's a longtime Trek fan, it was, well, unbearable. And for those people who weren't Trek fans that were coming to Star Trek for the first time, like our letter writer Brett said, it diminished the whole Star Trek universe by taking away the believability of the transporter as a fictional storytelling device. By stripping it of all of its qualities and making it essentially magic, you don't believe in it anymore, which diminishes the Star Trek franchise as a whole. Make it relatable. Unrelatable characters and emotions can take audiences out of the zone just as much as the most egregious of plot holes. While the fantasy world of Game of Thrones is far beyond the scope of our own, the recognizable wants, needs, and arcs across the ensemble of characters keep viewers invested, dragons or not. Strive to craft emotions in situations that are true to your characters and their environment. One of the things that didn't work for me in Game of Thrones seasons 7 and 8 was the distances in Westeros were suddenly compacted by the creators and made unbelievable. When it takes Robert Baratheon a month to take his caravan from King's Landing to Winterfell, well, then you realize just how far apart those places really are. Well, at the end, you can go from Dragonstone to Beyond the Wall and back in apparently 24 fucking hours. And when you're watching the show, you're like, guys, this isn't working for me. You're asking me to believe somebody sends a raven and then Dany flies back on a dragon while the White Walkers are surrounding our characters. This would have taken days, if not weeks. But you're asking us to believe in this when you've already shown us it took Robert Baratheon this long to walk to Winterfell. I know a bird can fly faster, but give me a fucking break. You're showing us them being attacked for maybe a 24-hour period. And that's one of the reasons people don't like the latter seasons of Game of Thrones. Some people do. Some people it doesn't bother them. For me, it does. And I'm not saying people that it doesn't bother I'm not better or less than they are. But I would say that there are people that will just let it slide. I'm not one of those people, and I don't think a lot of astute viewers are, especially viewers that are compelled to watch science fiction, fantasy, and horror. These are people that are compelled to ask for verisimilitude and suspension of disbelief more than just about anyone else. Another thing with Frank I was discussing when it comes to Game of Thrones, I was talking about Lord of the Rings. When you see Gandalf roll up to the Shire in the beginning of Fellowship, what do we see? We see Frodo reading a book, and he looks at Gandalf, and it's not some great wizard rolls in with a fire and brimstone opening. He just pulls in his cart, horse-drawn cart. You're late. A wizard is never late, Frodo Baggins. He arrives precisely when he means to. You're in. You believe these characters, and then when Gandalf's cart rolls over the bridge, the camera pans up and you see the Shire. Do they show you lots of magical happenings? No. You're seeing hobbits sweep their front stoop, one of them looks dismayingly at Gandalf. And Gandalf doesn't do something big. He sets off some fireworks for the little kids. Yay, Gandalf. Do you know he's part of he's an Astari? No, you don't. They make you believe in the fantasy world through making sure you understand that hobbits and wizards are people. The brilliance of that film and Tolkien himself is they make you believe that all of these fictional people are real through being relatable to us. Now, Gandalf is an immortal being, maybe. We've seen him transmute into Gandalf the White. But by then, you're so invested in that character because you believe in him that, okay, the fantasy you buy into. And that's what's so important. And all of our great fantasy IPs made us believe. The people that are writing modern fantasy, it's hard. Like, I would say, Mr. Kring over there at The Boys made us believe in everything that's going on. And sure, they had the comic book to work off of, but they made us believe in everything that's going on at Vought and with all Gen V and all that stuff, because they made everybody relatable, and they extrapolated on everything we think about but we never articulate. Like, you know, what if you could make yourself small and crawl up into the urethra of your lover? What would happen then? Well, it could be good or it could be really, really bad. But they'll show you, and everything they show you is disgusting or as interesting as it can be on The Boys, makes you believe. Makes you believe. And that's why they do it. That's why they do it. Keep it consistent. Narrative continuity is the key to keep them believing. If you set up a rule at the beginning of your story, stick to it. This doesn't necessarily mean it has to be realistic. If the first act of your script properly establishes that everyone in your world can fly, that's fine. The audience may lose suspension of disbelief, however, if a notable character dies from falling out a window. Actors also benefit from considering suspension of disbelief for more engaging performances. Realistic acting and mindful engagement with the surrounding environment can help create a sense of credulity. Act, don't distract. Aim for nuanced acting that still conveys complex emotions and character interiority. Answering the W questions about your character, who, what, where, when, why, can help you gain a sense of their motivations and what drives their behavior. Respond to your fellow actors and remember that the show must go on. Even though a flubbed line or clumsy move might take you out of the moment, you can still stop it from doing the same for the audience by keeping things moving before the minor distraction becomes a full-fledged disruption. Be mindful. Consider your space and place and engage with it mindfully. This will keep you immersed in your performance and prevent scenes from slipping through your fingers. Think about your body and its place in the environment around it. On stage, that might mean following stage directions and using props with intention. On set, it could mean purposely acting as though the green screen behind you is a real depiction of an otherworldly environment and not a blank wall. Suspension of disbelief examples from film, theater, and television. All fiction requires the suspension of disbelief for audience members to become lost in its unreal world. Here are some examples from movies, TVs, and plays. Suspension of disbelief in film include in Get Out. A surgery can transplant people's brains into other people's bodies. Entangled, an evil witch can use the power of a young woman's freakishly long hair to appear eternally youthful. La La Land. A pianist and an actress sing and dance in harmony despite not having any real musical accompaniment. The same goes for any musical in which the music is non-diegetic. Diegetic means that music is happening within the scene, like somebody's playing a piece of music or a record, or they're singing. Non-diegetic is having music outside of the proscenium of the frame. So when you're hearing music that's part of a musical, but the characters seem to be responding to it, that's non-diegetic. TV examples include The Office. People working in an office allow a documentary crew to follow and film them, including at home, for multiple years. Stranger Things, a mysterious underground otherworld exists and exerts its supernatural pull on the real world. Grey's Anatomy. All doctors can moonlight as models. Examples of suspended disbelief in theater include in Wicked, a green-skinned witch exists. In Richard III, people naturally speak in iambic pentameter. And in Waiting for Godot, two friends wait for a third long enough that a tree grows several leaves. So, again, I'm obsessed with the idea of suspension of disbelief and making audiences believe in what we care to show them. I really am. And all of my favorite things make me believe. There are things I like that I don't necessarily believe in, but I understand, like Star Crash, my beloved Star Crash. Luigi Cozzi's, or Louis Coates, if you believe his English name in the directing credit of the film. I love Star Crash because it's an amalgamation of everything I grew up with, Ray Harryhausen and all that, but admittedly there's not a whole lot of verisimilitude there, but I love it anyway because of the verve on display. Same probably goes with the Japanese Star Wars ripoff, even though it's not really a ripoff, it's just inspired by Star Wars. Message from Space, with a giant sailing ship that's in space. Add like Galaxy 999, Galaxy Express 999, and Space Battleship Yamato, or My Youth on Arcadia with Captain Harlock and the Arcadia, his ship. I love all that shit. Is there verisimilitude? No. But I still love it anyway. So it's okay to like things that don't have verisimilitude and that I just still suspend my disbelief. Why is there a train in space that apparently has just magical tracks that appear in front of it? Don't know. Don't care. Still can love it. I'm not that much of a wet blanket, even though I'm yelling at clouds. You know, I'm not, though. I'm really not. But when it comes to things like, well, Star Wars, the great fire debate of last week. Let's talk about the great fire debate of last week, shall we? So, myself and many other people got pissed off because there was a fire burning in space, and we didn't like it. It looked ridiculous because it looked like a campfire burning in space. Now, I can't tell you how many people sent me, well, you know, it's not like we haven't seen a fire in Star Wars this whole time, Rob. And I got shots of Amidala's Star Destroyer or SR-71. I got shots of the Executor falling into the Death Star, which we're going to get to later, with the flames burning on the bridge. Well, here's the thing that I wanted to say to people. You see, when you're dealing with a controlled or an atmosphere environment that gets hit with a laser blast, which all of that's ridiculous anyway, but again, they make you fucking believe. But if something explodes out into space, they do a pretty good job of showing us the explosion and the outgassing of whatever atmospheric, whatever was in there, plasma, but it dissipates. We know it. It's moving and it dissipates. It's a trope. It's something that we've come to believe in as far as science fiction movies like Star Wars are concerned. However, like in The Acolyte, Episode 1, when you see a flame just dancing around burning like it's a campfire, and it doesn't have any of that outgassing, it doesn't have... Immediately my mind goes, I'm looking at that going, why did the producers choose to show fire like this? That's... it clearly is unbelievable. Maybe it was a budgetary thing. I mean, for me, show me some weird, cool plasma fire burning, and you've got outgassing, but the outgassing wasn't what was on fire. You know, it's like when you take a can of hairspray and you put a match up to it or something, or a lighter, and you go, a giant flame comes out. Well, now here's the thing. Even when you do that, even though it's actual real-world physics, when you see it, you might think, you might not believe it. Can you really do that? Like, I'm an idiot. I was a kid. I'm like, I got to try that shit. You know, and you do. Can you get high off whip hits in the grocery store? Don't try this at home, kids. But even that doesn't even look real, but you know it is real. So when you see a fire in space, you've got to give me something more than just having a fire flickering and burning. And what people are saying is that, oh, Rob, it's not the point of the fact that there's like a campfire burning in space. It's the way it's presented. You can give me fire in space and I'll believe it. You have a spaceship rocking through hyperspace or whatever and it gets hit. And if the hull is breached, I'll see flames, even though it's ridiculous, but I'll buy it because they've made you buy it. So the fire in space in Star Wars is well established, which makes the little campfire on the hull of a ship in the Acolyte so egregiously off-putting. You're like, wait, whoa. What the fuck? So whatever verisimilitude, I believe the Star Wars universe is real. You know, I believe in it. I believe the sound because they made me believe in it. They made me believe in it. And that is not an easy thing to do. But they make you believe in it because the fairy tale fantasy qualities of Star Wars were adhered to. And someone, it's so funny. So I got another article. Let's talk about this because This was thrown at me as well. And unfortunately, I apparently forgot to put this. Let me just give me a minute and let me load this article onto my screen here, because this is something else that was thrown my way. And I am like, okay, well, if that's the way you think, I wanted to bring this up as well. And I wanted to delve into this because it's really sort of interesting. And here it is. Let me jump into it. Star Wars cutest droids would get stuck on the beach. This was in Science News Explores, and this was printed on May 4th, 2018. Science News Explores. This was written by Bethany Brookshire. R2-D2 and BB-8 never seemed to let anything hold them back, even when faced with vast, terrifying desert planets. R2-D2 trundles cheerfully across the sands of Tatooine. BB-8 takes his own sandy trek on Jakku. Sadly, such scenarios aren't realistic. Not because Star Wars is fiction, though it is. It's because a droid with wheels has no place on a desert planet. Wheels don't work well in sand, period, says Robin Murphy. She studies robotics at Texas A&M University in College Station. Wheels, she notes, dig in. The traction is just not there. Using them in a setting on sand, she says, is just wrong on so many levels. Murphy published an article on the pros and cons of Star Wars droids February 21st in the journal Science Robotics. It's easy to think that the wheels of R2-D2 or the ball of BB-8 would just slip over the sand, but slipping is why they would be in trouble. It has to do with the way a wheel rolls, explains Daniel Goldman. He studies biophysics, the physical forces related to living things, at the Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta. A wheel, or a BB-8 unit, moves forward because there is no slipping between the wheel and the ground. If an ant was riding on a wheel, it would go around, contact the ground, and come up to the same point, notes Goldman. This is because there's friction, resistance that the wheel encounters as it comes in contact with the ground. That works pretty well inside the Millennium Falcon with its solid metal floors. But sand is different. It's not a solid surface, but a compilation of tiny particles of rock. Those small pieces slip and move against one another. If BB-8 attempted to roll across a dune, the sand would slip around the little droid. The robot would soon dig itself into a hole, and as the little ball kept spinning, the sand would continue to slip. BB-8 would be unable to get enough friction under itself to climb out. Goldman knows just how badly this turns out. We tried it. When Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens, came out, says Goldman and his colleagues, they placed a model of BB-8 on a bed of sand. It's terrible, he explains. It makes a little pit it can't climb out of. R2-D2 wouldn't be much more successful, notes Murphy. The older droid, which made its first appearance in 77 Star Wars. I'm not going to say Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope because it didn't make an appearance in Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope. It just made an appearance in Star Wars in 1977. It has stuck its wheels on its feet that would get just as stuck. When dealing with slippery substances like sand, Murphy explains, it's best to have lots of surface area in contact with the surface. When you see things going across the desert, they use the properties of the sand like sidewinders, she notes. Sidewinders are a type of snake. They don't press into the sand as they move. Instead, they flatten their bodies, which helps them keep contact with the sand. A sidewinder-like robot might be one option for a desert droid. Another might be a droid that uses wide, flat treads to move, like a tank. Those treads spread out across the tank's weight and prevent the vehicle from sinking in as it moves. Murphy and Goldman have mused about droids because they are developing robots that can handle any terrain. Such robots would be useful for tanks, ranging from search and rescue after a disaster to exploring distant worlds in space. So, while BB-8 and R2-D2 belong in a galaxy long ago and far away, the lessons they provide could be pretty useful to us Earthlings here and now. So, there you go. This was one of the things people were throwing in my face. Well, how can you believe that R2-D2 and... Oh, I didn't say BB-8, but R2-D2 could roll across sand? Well, here's the thing. Now, these scientists obviously call bullshit on that, but when I was watching Star Wars, that thought never occurred to me. Why? Because in this universe of, well, we find out R2-D2 actually has rocket packs inside of him so he could fly. But in this universe, we do, in fact, watch a droid roll across the sand. It happened. I saw it. I didn't think to myself, I don't believe it. Now, modern scientists could think on Earth like that could never happen. But here's what I would say as an astute viewer of science fiction, fantasy, and horror. My mind makes certain leaps. Just because I'm an imaginative guy. I'm thinking to myself, okay, if you built an astromech droid with that kind of a propulsion, that kind of way of moving, there's probably things about R2 that we just don't know. For instance, maybe there's some kind of gravity mechanism in his wheels that allow the wheels to become, I don't know, infinitely heavy or something that allows him to roll across. Or maybe he's able to make himself lighter. Something in the mechanism of an astromech droid that is as yet undefined, maybe it's in some of the visual guidebooks, I don't know, addresses that issue. And because of the way they filmed the movie, of course they had a hard time making R2-D2 move. They had to put things down. But in the movie, I fill in the blanks. Any questions I might have, I'm like, well, it's clearly happening. I'm watching it happen. And I'm not asking myself why it's happening because I'm seeing it happen. So I just assume that there is some unspoken reason or ability that R2-D2 or astromech droids have that I just don't know about. Because they wouldn't bother to tell me. Because you just buy it. Now, maybe scientists will call bullshit on that. But I never had a problem. In my mind, I'm thinking, well, I'm watching this happen, and while I know it would be hard to roll out on sand, it happens in this universe, so I'm thinking there must be something. My mind fills in those blanks. I can still suspend disbelief because my imaginative mind is filling in the blanks. I'm clearly watching it happen. It's not a problem. It's not a problem for our old astromech R2 droid, but it works. So I am left to have to fill in the blanks, and does it bother me? No. So when people throw, well, Rob, it's patently ridiculous that R2-D2 can roll across Tatooine's jungle wastes on his wheels. I'm like, no, it's not, because I saw it happen. So I might not understand the physics behind it, but I know it's possible. And that's what suspension of disbelief is. If you're going to tell me that he could never do that, I would say, au contraire, I'm watching it happen. In the galaxy far, far away. Now, here's the thing. People would say, then why don't you have the same problem with the fire in the Acolyte? Because I've already seen how fire works in the Star Wars universe. They've shown me there's explosive decompression. If something is venting into the atmosphere, it doesn't just burn like a nice little fire. It's not the fact that there was a fire in space. It's the way it was burning and the way it was presented. It was presented in such a way where the showrunners didn't seem to care, but I'm like, I don't believe your fire. If you're going to show me a fire in space, you got to give me more. I need more of an effect. I need some kind of something to tell me that there's a reason. But when I'm just watching real flames or maybe computer-generated flames flickering, looking like a campfire, I'm like, I'm out. And the thing is, the devil is in the details. I'll watch the executor go nosediving into the Death Star. I'll buy that. I'll buy it. I got a great article about that. And I'll buy the flames coming out of the bridge because all that atmosphere is burning off. So that's the thing. It's not the fire itself. It's the presentation and the plausibility of the fire in a fictional universe. Make me believe, man. And the thing is, no matter how good your show or movie or book or whatever, if you do one thing, I'll tell you something. I'll give you an example of a franchise I fucking hate now that I loved. I am an unabashed fan of The Fast and the fucking Furious. Episode 5. I love The Drift. I love Fast 5. I can't, sitting through episodes 9 and 10 of those films, a franchise I loved, I can't do it. It's physically painful. I can't watch. I probably will not see the next one. I forced myself to watch 10. I hated every minute of it. Hated it. People would say, why, Rob? I had a conversation with John Billingsley. when we had done we were at the Soho House in West LA, and when we had finished the documentary, we did a roundtable conversation with the entire cast that you can see on the Blu-ray. We took them all to dinner at the Soho House, and for the appreciation for them doing this roundtable discussion for us. And I remember telling John Billingsley, we had this conversation. He's like, "You cannot tell me that the Fast and Furious franchise movies are good." He refused to believe it. And I said, no, for pulp B movies, which is what the original Fast and Furious was, I'm like, they're a lot of fun. And I was explaining in Fast 5, the big ask in that movie is you have to believe that those two cars can carry that vault through the streets of Rio, smashing through buildings. By the way, they couldn't. I know they couldn't. But in the context of the movie, I believe that they could. But when you get to episode 9, there's no physics. The whole point about making movies about car chases is we, the audience, have been in cars. And we know what it's like, or maybe some of you don't know what it's like, but I know what it's like to drive 120 miles an hour in the middle of a city. And if you've done that, that's exhilarating enough. And a great car chase, that's why Bullet still works. That's why The French Connection still works. That's why To Live and Die in L.A. still works. That's why John Frankenheimer's Ronin still works when it comes to great car chases. There's a great one in one of the Bourne Identity movies, I think in the Bourne Supremacy. You believe it because car chases, good ones, are physically grounded in the universe. But by the time you get to Fast 9, with that going across the rope bridge or whatever the fuck it is, I'm out. The first 15 minutes of that movie destroyed any credibility that franchise had. I can't watch. I didn't buy Fast 10. I don't own it. I never thought... Fast 9, I bought it. I will never watch that movie. I own it. Never watch it again. I have no enjoyment in that film. And so people's threshold for suspension of disbelief, I think, is different. Everybody's got a different threshold. But man... the whole point of car chases is the more realistic they are, the better they are. That's why I have a problem. I mean, I liked Furiosa. I love Fury Road. Fury Road was practical effects augmented with CG. Well, by the time you get to Furiosa, a lot of it is just CG. And I think the verisimilitude was a real problem in the film, as much as I enjoyed it. I don't know why they chose to do that. But, yeah, it's kind of a bummer. Now, I want to get to a Wired article. This Wired article was published on May 4th, 2016. So it's an older article. And I want to get into it because it's fucking awesome. So let's look into it right now. Happy May 4th. Let's break down a Super Star Destroyer's super death. Now, I think this is a terrible visual effect shot, but it sort of talks about what we've been talking about. I mean, look at this. Do you believe that? Do you believe, like, the nose penetrates the hull? I mean, I get it. It's dramatic. It's physical. But in this scene from Return of the Jedi, a Super Star Destroyer, the Executor, crashes into the Death Star. What can we learn from a physics analysis of this event? And this comes to us from Rhett Elaine. In keeping with my long tradition of doing some kind of physics analysis for Star Wars Day, I celebrate this year by looking at the Death Star 2 in Return of the Jedi. In a pivotal scene, the Rebels mount an all-out offensive against an enormous Super Star Destroyer in the battle over Endor. The attack on the bridge sends the ship crashing into the Death Star, and that's about all you need to know. I don't know why the destroyer crashed after a fighter hit the bridge. Surely a vessel so vast would have had a backup bridge. But knowing why is not my job. Instead, I'll focus and look at the time between when the crew lost control of the destroyer until the time it hit the Death Star. Let me start with two important details. First, the size of the Super Star Destroyer. I won't try to estimate this, I'll just use values from other experts. Wikipedia pegs the Executor-class Star Destroyer as 19 kilometers long. The second important detail, the Death Star has a diameter of 160 kilometers. Next, there are two things I need to determine from the movie. First, the altitude over the Death Star of the Star Destroyer. Honestly, this is rather difficult. We never get a clear shot of both the spacecraft and the Death Star. Really, the best view shows the Death Star as seen from the bridge of the Star Destroyer just before it crashes. And there it is. So you can see it. Bring that up. We all know it. It's entirely feasible to use the apparent curvature of the surface of the Death Star, take that you flat earthers, to estimate the altitude of the starship. However, it still would be an estimate, and it would include some fairly complicated calculations. Granted, there is a possibility that it isn't too hard, and it's my fault. Instead, let me just say that the Death Star looks similar to Earth as seen from the orbital altitude of the International Space Station. I'm going to assume that the ratio of altitude to planet radius is the same for both cases, and that means this. There it is. Using an International Space Station altitude of 300 kilometers and an Earth radius of 6,370 kilometers, I get a Star Destroyer altitude of 3.77 kilometers. Of course, that can't be correct since the length of the Executioner-class Star Destroyer is 19 kilometers. Okay, let's just hold off on this value for now. Now let me focus on the impact speed. If I use the length of the Star Destroyer, I can get the position of the spacecraft in each frame using tracker video analysis. Looking at just the motion toward the Death Star, I get the following plot. And that is right here. The slope of this plot shows an impact speed of 3.7 kilometers. Yes, that's 7,829 miles per hour. It's 3.7 kilometers per second. That's 7,829 miles per hour. Yes, that's pretty fast. The mass of the Death Star. The real question remains, why is it moving so fast? There are three possible answers. After rebels destroyed the bridge, the Super Star Destroyer veered out of control and used its thrusters to drive into the Death Star. The destroyer used its engines in some way to stay above the Death Star. The attack eliminated this ability, and the ship fell into the Death Star due to the gravitational interaction between the two objects. The impact was the result of the engines and gravity. For the purpose of this analysis, I'm going to assume the collision was due only to the gravitational interaction. If that's the case, I can use this to estimate the mass of the Death Star, and I will make a couple of more assumptions. The Super Star Destroyer starts this motion from rest. The velocity is 0 kilometers per second. The starting altitude of the SSD, the Super Star Destroyer, is 30 kilometers above the Death Star. Since we don't really care about time during this motion, we will use the work energy principle. This states that the total work done on a system is equal to its change in energy. If I include both the destroyer and the Death Star in the system, there will be no work, and the energy will include both kinetic energy and potential energy, and I can write it as this. Don't ask me what these mean. I don't understand them. One important note, technically, both the Death Star and the Star Destroyer will have changes in kinetic energy. However, if we assume the mass of the Death Star is much greater than the spacecraft, it will have a negligible change in velocity. From the work energy equation, I can solve for the mass of the Death Star. I'm calling that mass 2. There it is. G is the gravitational constant, which is 6.67 times 10 to the 11th nm/kg. I don't even fucking know. Blah, blah, blah is the velocity of the Star Destroyer on impact. Using my value for impact velocity in the starting and ending position with respect to the center of the Death Star, I get a mass of 2.7 times 10 to the 22nd kilograms. That would give it an average density. I don't even know. Anyway, if the Death Star was solid steel, it would have a density of around 8,000 kilograms per metric ton. I don't even know what that means. I'm sure smarter people out there than me know, but it's a lot of calculations this guy did for this fictional article. Yes, I mean the article's real, but the question's fictional. Yes, this causes some problems. Actually, the question's real, but it's all fictional, so that's kind of weird. Yes, this causes some problems. First, how do you get the density that high? Maybe the Death Star has a super dense inner core. Maybe. Also, this large mass, along with a relatively small size, would make the gravitational field on the surface very large, 28.7 times larger than the Earth's surface field. Second, the above plot of the position shows a nearly constant velocity. With this large of a mass, the Star Destroyer would have a non-constant acceleration as it moved closer to the Death Star. An important note about Star Wars physics. Yes, I know there's another explanation for the large calculated mass of the Death Star. The other reason is that Star Wars is just a movie, and a Star Destroyer crashes because it is a model controlled by humans. Honestly, I'm okay with this explanation because it's obviously true. Since there have been other stories about how scientists like to suck the fun out of everything, let me make a few points. I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I saw Episode 4 in the theaters when I was young, and I loved it. I'm also a big fan of science fiction, fantasy, and superheroes. Not sure if the Marvel Universe will be considered science fiction. Yes, it would. There are physics errors in just about every movie, and really, I'm okay with that. I don't interrupt the movie to point out these errors. I just watch the movie and enjoy it. Yes, it's nice when a movie includes correct scientific ideas, but that's not the goal. The goal is to make it an entertaining and compelling story, even if it sometimes seems like the only goal is making money. Saying that filmmakers should include better science is like saying scientific papers should have a better plot. I like that, actually. Although I don't necessarily agree with this. Actually, I would love to see scientific papers with an interesting plot. Then why do I analyze the physics of Star Wars and other things? Well, I like to use scenes from cool movies to explain physics. And sometimes I see something cool like the collision with the Super Star Destroyer, and I think, I wonder. That's it. It's just fun physics. But what about a movie that wants to use better physics? Help is always available. The Science and Entertainment Exchange is a great place to start. It connects movie producers with real scientists. I have to admit it, I sometimes do get in a little bit of a geek rage over some science in a movie. And now for something else. Here we go. Centripetal acceleration of the Super Star Destroyer crew. Oh, you thought this would all be over now? Wrong. The physics never ends. Check out the Super Star Destroyer right after it loses control. There it is. Let's look first. See the fire coming out of the bridge that's been, compromised? First, that doesn't bother me. Even the way it's burning, because it seems to be burning straight. There's something about it that I like. I believe it. I believe that fire. Let's first look at the rotation of this crashing starship. If I mark the bridge as the point of rotation, I can get the following plot of angular position versus time. There it is. From the slope of this plot, I get nearly constant angular velocity of 0.159 radians per second. Big deal, right? Well, yes, it is. Since the Star Destroyer is rotating, everyone aboard is moving in a circular path. To move in a circle, you must accelerate. The centripetal acceleration depends on the angular velocity and the radius of the circle. The magnitude of this acceleration can be written as this. The angular velocity for the Super Star Destroyer isn't super large. However, the circular radius for the Imperial crew at the front of the vessel will have a super large radius. It's kind of like what we saw at the beginning of Season 3 with the Space Hotel in For All Mankind. If I approximate this radius as about 15 kilometers, I can calculate the centripetal acceleration with a value of 379 ms to the squared, or 39 Gs. That might not be a high enough acceleration to kill you outright, but the crew probably passed out before the collision with the Death Star. I guess that's for the best. Who would want to witness the crash and explosion of the Death Star? Now you can see the importance of a nice physics analysis of Star Wars. It's not just to point out errors, but to provide more meaning to the plot. Next time you watch Return of the Jedi, just think of all the helpless Imperials stuck in the doomed spacecraft. Now, here's the thing. I provided that example because here was a scientist trying to tell us about what it was like for the Super Star Destroyer, the Executor, to crash into the Death Star. And you know what? People have been throwing this meme at me all the last couple days with the fire burning. I believe, man. I don't know about those physics, and I don't like that visual effect shot when you first see the flames go whoosh. I know it's a physical effect, but Return of the Jedi has some pretty shoddy effects work, especially compared to Star Wars and Empire. I'm just saying. Come on, R2 and 3PO face down in the sand. What the fuck, George? What the fuck, Richard Marquand? Rest in peace. I'm just saying, give me a break. I was supposed to believe that shit? I didn't. But I did believe, and I did like the fact that the Super Star Destroyer crashes into the Death Star. Do I believe that explosion No, I didn't believe it in 1983 and I don't believe it now, but I don't care. You can make those questions up, or you can decide what you believe or not. It's up to you. It's not up to me, and I'm not going to tell you what you should or you shouldn't believe. Now, before we continue, I wonder if anybody has anything to say about any of this. Let's see. Does anybody have any questions or any of those things? I'm going to find out. Well, now, there is some questions here. There's a lot of questions, to be honest. Let's jump into what you guys are saying. Let's start out with X-Wing for $20. X-Wing says, thank you again for your insight into nerd culture narrative. As a content creator, you remind me to pause, gather my thoughts, be eloquent, and to use emotion as a tool to inspire. Something Star Wars writers have forgotten. That's very nice of you to say. I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, I mean, what if you're not writing to inspire or to enlighten, why are you writing? And the thing is, great stories appeal to everybody. If you're writing, just to appeal to and if you want to appeal, if you want to, hide your message, that's okay. But great stories, you should endeavor to appeal, I think. I mean, whether it's right or wrong, I think you should endeavor to appeal to everyone, if you can. I think so, rightly or wrongly. But that's a very nice of you to say. I appreciate that. And maybe a lot of people, they don't necessarily believe in that. And that's okay. But thank you for that, and I appreciate the support on the channel. I really do. Scott Bartholomew says, Canon is everything when it comes to the lifespan of IPs. Now, here's the thing. Canon is fun. Canon is part of the great, juicy stuff. One of the reasons that The Lord of the Rings is so great is Professor Tolkien created all this shit. He had backstories for everybody. He knew what was going on. He treated it like it was real. And when you delve into the appendices, you delve into the Lost Tales, where you're going to read about Baron and Luthien, you fucking believe, man, because he made you believe. There is not one detail left unturned. One of the reasons I liked reading Tom Clancy's earliest books when I got my hands on Hunt for Red October or Red Storm Rising, this was gear porn, this was politics porn, this was weapons porn. It was just like all the details. I'm like, fuck yeah, man, give me more of that shit. Because the more you lay on the details, the more I believed, man. I believed in Middle-earth. I believed because J.R.R. Tolkien made me believe. And it's frustrating to watch stuff that comes from a very believable place. George R.R. Martin's work. I mean, way before Game of Thrones, I was a George R.R. Martin fan in the 80s. His book, Vampires on the Mississippi, Fever Dream. I love that. His superhero anthology he edited, the Wild Card series. I remember reading Wild Cards 1, alternate history with superheroes, aces and jokers. Loved it. Believed it. Great story. It took place in the 60s in San Francisco. The Long Dark Night of Fortunato. Fucking love Fortunato. That shit was great. If you haven't read George R.R. Martin's Wild Card series, it's got great. Melinda Snodgrass wrote for it. It's a great. They called those mosaic novels. So it was a fictionalized universe, kind of like what they did in Kurt Busiek did in Astro City, and of course what they did in The Boys and all that. But Astro City, those were comics, whereas the Wild Cards novels were novels, and great stuff. If you haven't read them, really delve into that stuff. It was great. But yes, the universes are why we love our IPs so much. And one of the things that I find, I mean, modern audiences they don't have a lifelong attachment to the Star Trek universe the way I do. But when I watch, they just don't care. And part of what makes something interesting, that's why I like Star Trek novels so much. The very best of the Star Trek novels, the writers go to great pains, whether you're reading David Mack, whether you're reading the Reeve Stevens, whether you're reading Christopher Bennett, Peter David. I mean, my favorite Star Trek writers wrote these, John M. Ford with a Final Reflection. I mean, you believe, man, because they took the universe and they extrapolated upon it. They're like, well, we saw this. We saw this in one episode. This must be true. And somebody would go into it. I'm like, I would read these books, go, fuck yeah, man, that's totally right. That's why people like the extended universe of Star Wars. Oh yeah, that's, you know, the X-Wing, the Squadron books, the people believe, man. And that's why canon is important. Star Wars is a history of a fictional future that will never occur, but that history should be immutable. But they don't look at it that way. That's why I can't stand all this prequel bullshit. Let's change everything. Let's make Spock developmentally disabled. It's like, fuck you, don't do that shit. That is not real. I do not believe that. You have broken verisimilitude, you have broken canon, and you've broken believability. Why do you go in? Why don't they create new characters? If you create new characters, then I can believe in them. Don't take legacy characters and tell me something about them that isn't true. Because you are lying. At least that's the way I think about it. Al Renshaw says, I saw episode 3 of The Acolyte. Please explain why Leslie felt the need to crap on established principles of the Force. No, man, it's a thread now. You can pull on it, right? Of the Force, George Lucas's worst dialogue ever. Why did Lucasfilm and Leslie feel the need to rewrite canon? Well, that's the question, isn't it? Because everybody wants to make whatever thing they're working on their own. Their own. That's what they want to do. And as a creator, I understand that. You know, I do. But for me, if somebody gave me an opportunity to play in an IP sandbox that I love, I would take the tact that my favorite Star Trek novelists have always taken, is the Star Trek we know happened. It's real Trek history. The stuff that went on in it occurred. No, I'm not going to come on, and you might be able to illuminate or elucidate or do something where you can add something to what occurred, but you still have to have some kind of fealty to what you've already seen. And the reason I like the best of the Star Trek novels is because the writers who loved the Star Trek universe, that's what made, and same was true of Star Wars or other, like the best of the EU books. But you love those stories because the authors, you knew when you read those books. When I read the Reeve Stevens fucking Prime Directive, or I read the Reeve Stevens Federation, or I read the Reeve Stevens book they wrote with Shatner, The Ashes of Eden, you could feel the love that these creators had for that IP. It just was dripping off the pages. Or the brothers Tipton writing for IDW. You read their Star Trek comics, you're like, these fuckers, they love the universe. You love it. And when you read their shit, you're like, well, I love this too. Because I believe, man. I believe. And that's what you want to believe. The problem with modern Star Wars, and especially what's going on with the Acolyte, you're like, okay. And again, I don't want to talk mad shit about the Acolyte. I really don't. But it perplexes me. When I watch that, like, to me, there are so many stories that you can tell. I was saying to somebody, I go, what was so disappointing about the Book of Boba Fett is the Book of Boba Fett should have been the great crime thriller in the Star Wars universe. And if if you were thinking like George Lucas, you could look at Yojimbo, or Yojimbo, or A Fistful of Dollars, for a few dollars more, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. That's where obviously Boba Fett was inspired by. But you go to Samurai, you go to Kurosawa and Sergio Leone, and give us that fucking movie. But don't give us the Vespa Gang and the weird. I mean, what they like. I don't understand. Like, why go there when what you should be doing is you don't have to do it exactly, but give us something. Boba Fett is a badass. Don't have him running around a kitchen grabbing a droid going, I am Boba Fett. Like, no, man. Boba Fett is fucking Christopher Walken and King of fucking New York, man. Or he's Nino Brown. He's Wesley fucking Snipes in New Jack City. Give me some of that shit. Give me some of that love. I want to see the Boba Fett version of that. So does everybody else. That's what you think we're getting. And Disney Star Wars so inexplicably does things like, why are you doing this? Like, why did you choose to tell us this story? Space witches? Immaculate conceptions? Look, I understand. I get it. A group of women. Hey, that's what you want to do. Fine. But why change everything? When you change, I mean, because all these creators want to put, here's the thing. When something was created 50 years ago, Everybody wants to see themselves. I don't buy the idea of seeing myself represented anywhere. And don't say, because, oh, well, Rob, you're a cis white male. You've been represented your whole life. Well, I went to South Korea, and let me tell you, when I went to South Korea, I didn't feel represented at all. It depends where on the planet you're standing. You know, it really does. It depends where you go. Here, yeah, sure. But travel overseas, and things change real fast. But the thing is, I'm more interested in looking out at the universality of stories. Star Wars appealed to everyone. It appealed to everyone. And that's what you're looking for. That's what I think stories are. And Star Wars is what it is. If you're going to work within the paradigm of Star Wars, try and figure something out allegorically, tell a story and look at something else. I mean, what I find that modern Star Wars isn't doing is there's no allegorical story. You know, you're not telling a story about anything else. It's just about Star Wars now. You know, which I find very, very strange. I don't understand. So and why rewrite that canon? I don't know. I really don't know. Why do you want to diminish the Force? Why do you want to diminish the Jedi? Have they been diminished enough? They couldn't find Sidious right underneath them. You know, this great Sith Lord, they would go to his office and visit every day, and they didn't know. I mean, the Jedi couldn't have been dumber than they were in the prequel trilogy, but apparently, yes, they could. Mr. Locke for a $50 super chat. Oh my God. Thank you for supporting me in that way. Creative integrity has been replaced with shareholder capitalism, fandom with activism, creators with diversity hires, fans with shills, mythos and morals with ideology, and finally profits with losses. Hollywood is dead. Well, you know, Hollywood's been dead before. I would say there is a lot of that. Here's I think a truism. If you are not chasing the best story you can tell, you will always fail. All of those things. Whether you want to have better representation, whether you want to make a profit, whatever, if you're looking to do those things and you're not paying attention, the story is always king. If you're making money telling stories, you have to make stories that work for everybody. Now, details and specificity are what makes stories really interesting. But the idea should be to make stories palatable for everybody, no matter who they are, where they came from, what their background is, every shape, size, color, creed, political background. Now, I'm not saying don't tell political stories. I fucking love political stories. I love 70s paranoid political thrillers. Give me some fucking Parallax View. Give me some Alan Pakula. You know, give me Clute. Give me 3 Days of the Condor. You know, All the President's Men's a docudrama, but I love my paranoid 70s conspiracy thrillers. And you know, whatever your politics are, you know, you watch the Parallax View, that's some cool shit. So cool that Chris Carter's like, yeah, I'm going to turn that into a TV series. You know, I mean, that shit was awesome, and it appeals to everybody. But like you said, shareholder capitalism, what people don't realize is the best stories make the most money. Now, you know, maybe Shawshank Redemption didn't make as much money as it should have because it had a terrible marketing campaign and they didn't know what to do with it. But it was still based on one of the Stephen King's great novellas, and Frank Darabont knocked that shit out of the park. All of his collaborators, Roger Deakins, all the actors. I mean, come on, it was a phenomenal film. It didn't make money right away, but it endured. It has a long tail. And I think over the years, I bet that movie's earned out. But the problem is, yes, people are corrupting storytelling with other agendas. Your only agenda should be, when you tell a story, is to tell the best story possible for an audience that will embrace it. Now, if you want to tell a story about, I mean, I love stories that have specificity in them. The more specific something is, tell me a story about a subculture I don't know about. Tell me a story about, like, I didn't know much about the LA punk scene. You know, give me. I mean, Repo Man is probably not the best example, but I love that movie. Suburbia may be a better example, but the more specificity you give me in a story, I don't care what fringe, alternative, lifestyle, political thing. I'll watch anything that has that kind of specificity if the story's good. The problem is, what do I say? What do I say all the time? Never put your universe before your stories and characters. Then you wind up with Kurtzman's like The Mummy. You can't, it's just like, I've told people, you cannot set out to make a cult movie. You will always fail. You will always fail. A cult movie is not something that you can create. A cult movie just happens. And if you try and create a cult movie, you've already failed because you can't do that. I'm going to do the next Rocky Horror Picture Show. Even Richard O'Brien tried to do that with Shock Treatment. It didn't work, man. Did not work. And you can't do it. You have to tell the great story. You have to be pure to the story that you're telling. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And now, the problem is there's a lot of money involved. So how do we make money? Well, you make money from storytelling the way you've always made money from storytelling. You tell a great story. Do I think that Dan Brown is the greatest novelist in the world? I don't. But let me tell you something. I was reading all about the Da Vinci Code. I fucking picked that book up. I read that shit in 2 days. Is it a great novel? Maybe not. But as a propulsive narrative, I couldn't stop turning those pages. Now, is it the greatest story in the world? No, but the story Dan Brown set out to tell fucking succeeded. Banger. Worked it out. Made it happen. I couldn't put that book down. Gillian Flynn, I think it's Jill. Is it Gillian? I don't know. I read same thing. I read a review of Gone Girl. Had that shit. When it first came out, maybe a pre-release. I think I had that girl. I had that book there the first day it was out. I read that book like I read Project Hail Mary in one sitting. I couldn't put that shit down. I'm like, oh my God. And Fincher's movie is a great adaptation of that. The best stories will always succeed. They might not be discovered right away, but you'll never lose if you tell a great story and be true to the characters, true to your universe. Anything else, if you're working in an IP and you're trying to bring your own agenda and turn it into something it isn't, trying to subvert expectations, unless the story's good, you will fail every single time. You got to be true to the story. The stories and the characters. Yeah, you can make it as specific as you want. You want to give me an interesting look at a subculture I'm not aware of? I'll fucking watch that shit. If you make the story good, it doesn't have to appeal to me, but it has to appeal to whatever you're telling. So, or it has to appeal to the paradigm or whatever the tale it is you want to tell. So, Mr. Locke, creative integrity has been replaced with shareholder capitalism. The problem is, what they don't understand is the financial model does not change. You tell the best stories, you make the most money. Ultimately, in Hollywood, you never make money following a trend. You only make money setting trends. That's all you can do. Sometimes, you fail for whatever reason. But I'll tell you one thing. If you are trying to follow trends and you're never going to win. What trend did Star Wars follow? What trend did Raiders follow? The MCU. What trend did making Iron Man 1 follow? Ghostbusters. Beverly Hills Cop. I mean, you think about the most successful movies in Hollywood history. They didn't follow trends. They set them. The great storytellers do the same thing. Garrett Groover says, you can have any director make a Star Wars movie. Who do you pick and why? I'll tell you something. I wouldn't. Star Wars is done. Star Wars is a dead IP. Now, I love Star Wars just as much as everybody else, but until Star Wars figures out a way to tell a story that's not so far up its own Star Wars ass, it will be irrelevant. People love the Star Wars iconography. They love it. And that's not going to go away. But make some fucking video games. The Star Wars stories, first of all, Disney will never let Star Wars be that interesting. And two, get away from the ridiculousness of the same fucking Jedi Sith bullshit, because the people don't even understand what the Jedi and the Sith are. People are telling stories and making that shit up. Dave Filoni's telling the same goddamn thing over and over and over again. Go away. Tell a Star Wars story. Do not talk about fucking Jedi or Sith ever again, because the people, all they're doing is changing what the Jedi and Sith are to make them whatever they want to do. It's fucking terrible. It's not good. Oh, let's tell a Star Trek story. Oh, let's give Spock a sister. Let's tell a story about Spock. I mean, my God, why do you have to tell stories about all the people we already know? Because creators have nothing to say. They don't know how to create within their own universes. So it's like, okay, we can subvert the Jedi, or we can just replay or recast a character we already know and do something else with them. Really? The Star Trek universe is so gigantic. I would offer that within the Star Trek novel series, Peter David wrote like 15 novels with brand new characters and stories he created that are 10 times better than modern Star Trek. Why didn't they just go adapt those books? Or David Mack's Vanguard series, do that. Or with the EU, why didn't you just adapt the Thrawn novels? Why hire somebody that made fucking Star Trek 09 and Star Trek Into Darkness, the worst big budget science fiction movie ever made? Why do that? You already have this stuff you already have people that already made great stories. They're already there. They're already there. And they're way better than the drivel we're getting. That's what's so frustrating. I mean, an Alien versus Predator movie. They could have gone to the Dark Horse Alien versus Predator comic that was made by people that love aliens and love predators, and that comic was a banger. Go make the Alien Hive movie based on that comic book. These stories are already here. They're already all around us, and we all know. Not the people in Hollywood, though. Not the people in Hollywood. We have to hire somebody that's on this list of 10 people. They don't necessarily want to make a Star Wars or Alien movie, but these are the only 10 people we can hire. Why do that? Why not go adapt one of those fucking books? You know what? I am in the process of making a 10-episode audio drama with actors you will all recognize. I don't just mean 1 or 2 actors. I'm like 25 actors you're going to recognize. And you know what? I'm adapting a book. And you know who I got to adapt the book? An award-winning novel called True Detective. I got the writer of the book, Max Allan Collins, who's been writing for 60 fucking years. I got him to adapt his own material. And every single person who has read his 320-page script, the 10 episodes, the 10 chapters of his book that we're adapting, every single actor who's read this, I love this. That's why they've come on to the show. Why don't they do that more often? I don't know. I don't know. So, Garrick, I know I'm ducking your question. I appreciate the support, but I would rather have any director that I love enough that I'd want him to make a Star Wars movie, or her to make a Star Wars movie. I would say, you know what? Go make an original work, or go find something. Go find a story that you love, a book you want to adapt, whatever it is. Give me something that you're passionate about, and I want to see a movie that I haven't seen before. Hunter Becknell says, Enterprise, what we got back didn't live long, fortunately. That's a motion picture for you. Roger Paulson. That's like Robert Paulson. But you're Roger Paulson. Thank you for the super sticker. Stephen Langford, for $20, says, happy birthday, Rob. I hope your birthday wish of better Star Trek comes to fruition. You've suffered long enough. But your Star Trek rants are God tier. Embrace your old man yelling at clouds, or should I say Kurtzman. You know what? Watching the watching the Star Trek franchise win a Peabody Award for overall excellence was amazing. But to see J.J. Abrams and Alex Kurtzman up there taking credit was really sort of disheartening. Because they only exist because the people that came before them, and they haven't exactly lived up to the mantle of excellence that they inherited. So, yeah, Joey Johnson says Harry Potter is definitely a believable world. Well, I would say this. J.K. Rowling went to great lengths to make it believable. Now, I was a little old when Philosopher's Stone came out. I mean, I read it because it was a sensation. And, I mean, I liked it, but it was an amalgamation of all this other different fantasy stuff that I had seen and loved, but it was not necessarily new to me. But it was good stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think J.K. Rowling did a good job making people believe. Eric Ritter says Tom Hanks did an interview recently where he described the Omaha Beach scene in Private Ryan as having verisimilitude. Is he part of the PGS, Rob? Oh, he totally is. Tom Hanks is totally part of the Post-Geek singularity. 100%. 100%. And yeah, he absolutely is. And I love that about Tom Hanks. Let me go back and see what other people I want to get back. There's our friend Sonny Dominguez, the king of squirting, says, I saw the Frank Miller documentary American Genius last night. Ooh, I didn't know it was out. Recommended it as it gave me a better appreciation of his impact. How big a fan of his are you? I know his style has changed greatly, as it's not like it was in his 80s to 2000s work. I'm a huge fan of Frank Miller. I mean, I loved his Daredevil runs, both with the first Daredevil run with the whole Elektra storyline. I loved Ronin. You know, when I bought Ronin, it was one of the first big direct sale events in the early 80s that DC put out. I loved it. And then, of course, I went back in, and when he did Elektra Lives Again with Bill Sienkiewicz, and when he did, the Born Again run he did, and then Martha Washington, I was a big fan. I think he's gone off the deep end a little bit, but I did like, Dark Knight 3 Master Race. I did like that. And I love things like Hard Boiled, and for the most part, I really like Frank Miller. I did. So, Stephen Langford, I appreciate that. Eric Ritter, I just said that already. Ricky B says, for a $20 super chat, says, I couldn't suspend disbelief in The Walking Dead after the zombies' bodies decayed to the point that muscle, nerve, and whatever was gone. I didn't watch after episode 2, season 3, but I believe the zombies in World War Z. That's a really interesting, George Romero's Dawn of the Dead is one of my favorite movies. The whole thing about the zombie idea, the thing that scares me the most is societal collapse. That somebody's going to come to my door and human life will have no value. We saw that. We saw that on October 7th, what happened in Israel. You had a group of people going into family environments, nice places I'd actually been, and they slaughtered human beings, which is different from war. And I think that's my greatest fear, is that one day societal collapse, like watching in Civil War. That scene, what kind of American are you? That terrifying to me, because I believe it can happen. We've seen it happen in the 20th century over and over again. Khmer Rouge, Pol Pot, the stuff, the Balkan conflict. People just decide one day that these group of people, they're not human. We hate them for whatever reason, and we can kill them. We can go in and rape their women and kill their children and burn their houses down. That's my greatest fear. I'm a civilizationist, and we've seen societal collapse. The Rwandan genocide, horrifying that happened. What's going on in Sudan right now? Societal collapse. Scares the shit out of me. And because, once we've dehumanized, and it's so easy for us to dehumanize other people and animals or whatever, once that happens, there's no going back. And with zombies, the whole zombie genre, it plays into that. Societal collapse, and every person you meet wants to kill you, tear your throat out with their teeth, eat you, whatever. And there's no reasoning, there's no rationale, there's nothing you can do. So that always, but you're right. I mean, the verisimilitude, eventually the zombies would rot away. I mean, watching 10 years of Walking Dead was ridiculous, because after like 6 months, all the zombies would be dead. And another thing I understand where it comes from, but eventually living is going to be prized beyond measure. So nobody would want any human being that's still alive to die. It would be silly and self-defeating, but I get it. But it still scares the death out of me. Scares me to death. Ricky B says, Ricky B celebrates 41 months of membership. Where did I get 21 years? I'm like, that's not what I'm seeing with my eyes. Ricky, I appreciate that. Darth Hideous says, unrelated, but I got Cody Banks on VHS. Been on a retro movie binge. I know you didn't get your royalty for it, so here you go. Still love the movie. Hey, I'm glad you do. And by the way, check out that credit. The end credits are the main credits are in the end. And notice my producer credit, my co-producer credit in relation to all the other producers. Remember, you don't get what you deserve. You get what you negotiate. Scott Bartholomew says, how in the hell did Kurtzman inherit the franchise? Well, he had written, Star Trek '09 and Into Darkness. He probably had something in his contract that said so, but, worked on TV, and I'm sure before they had it out, Bad Robot and Secret Hideout it's just he's on a list. It's like, he's done this, so let's give him that. Why not? That's how Hollywood works. 1001 Johnny says, it might be a cruel question to ask, Rob, but how would you compare the 60s camp of the original Star Trek to Adam West Batman? There is no 60s camp in original Star Trek. You can't compare the two because they're totally different. Batman is very self-aware. It seeks out to make it campy. Like when they're going up, crawling up the wall, and Sammy Davis Jr. comes out, or all the different celebrities that come out the window. That's camp. That was camp that was intentionally created. We think of, especially audiences now that look back at certain elements of Star Trek and see camp in it. That's our perception. But the people at the time didn't see Star Trek as camp. It was a pretty serious show. Can't get me there, man. Anonymous says, I hope you had a great time in Korea. Korean fan here. I loved Korea. We went there to make a documentary on John Singlob, who was one of the people that founded the CIA. He was a revered hero during the Korean War, and he was being honored. And I met many Korean military officers that actually fought in the Korean War. I loved it. I loved Seoul. I don't remember the name of the hotel we were staying at. It was up on a hill. I'd have to look up my notes, but I loved Seoul. I love the people. I love the food. Can I say I love the women? Korean women are not just black, pink, and I know Lalisa's Thai. I know someone's gonna get pissed, but I love Korean cinema. Korean cinema, I think, is some of the best in the world. The last 20 years of Korean cinema has been amazing. Big fan. But I really loved Korea, and I'm not gonna lie. In Seoul, I went to a museum. We were shooting in this museum, and there was like the first Samsung VCR that they had made. I'm like, oh my God. I took way too many pictures of it. And the people I was with were like, what are you doing? And I'm like, this is the first Samsung VCR. That was crazy. But yeah, I loved it. And I'm glad that I have Korean fans. That's amazing. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. I'd love to go back. I'd love to go shoot something in I was just blown away by Seoul. It was great. And it was a lot of fun. Although I will say, I'm a pretty loud, boisterous American. I would have liked to talk to more regular Koreans out partying and stuff, but they kind of kept their distance from me. I don't blame them, to be honest. But it was cool going to see. We went and saw some hockey games at the Olympics, which was really cool. B Things says, working in someone else's world should be seen as an amazing creative challenge to work within a different framework. I totally agree. Bending it to your comfort zone is a failure to show your imagination and skill. 100% B Things. I 100% believe that. Ronzilla says, hi Rob, Star Trek Season 2, Who Mourns for Adonias episode, a huge energy field in the shape of a glowing green hand appears and grabs the USS Enterprise, halting its movement. Rob, I believed. Great to see you back. Well, I mean, yeah, but so here's the cool thing. So you see this hand. Now the hand, Apollo has turned the hand, he's made that, but it's really an energy field, and it's kind of explained in the episode. He's got that temple where the power is emanating, and all of his power is technologically based. And they discover that, and the hand is really just a force field that's emanating from the planet. But that was the thing about Star Trek. They made you go, what is this hand? And it's coming on, and it comes down, and, well, I should be doing it over. It's not going to work. But when it grabs the Enterprise, or let's have the Millennium Falcon stand in for the Enterprise, it would have grabbed there's Apollo's hand stopping the old Falcon in space. I got to move this model. The shelf that I was using, the shelf it was sitting on. I got to move it. But yeah, I liked it, and I believed. I'm glad you believe, Ronzilla, as you should. General Grievous sends in a tip and says, as caretakers of works of art like Star Trek and Star Wars, your job is to protect and preserve them from harm, not remake it. No more than a museum curator has the right to remove stars or add houses to Van Gogh's Starry Night, or to give the Mona Lisa a pixie cut. I Totally believe that. I think it's absolutely correct. Totally believe that. Yeah, I think that those are all very cogent statements. Hunter Becknell says his name was Robert Paulson. It's true. Captain Cisco says, what do you think about real aliens, UFOs, UAPs, David Grush, Christian Harloff, and his UAP show? I got to tell you, okay, I've watched all of Christian's UAP shows. I love them. David Grush, all this disclosure. And did you notice how all this disclosure just came up and then it went away? You know, you give me Bob Lazar talking about this stuff. Here's what I've been reading books about UFOs since I was a little kid. There was a Sun Classic picture called The Outer Space Connection. I read Eric von Donigan's Chariots of the Gods. Charles Berlitz's The Bermuda Triangle. I mean, I was Mr. Spontaneous human combustion. You give me some weird phenomenon, I believe it. You know, I think it from what we understand, look, space is big. Really big, as Douglas Adams will tell you. I like Fox Mulder. I want to believe, and if you listen to people like Bob Lazar, he says this technology that they've recovered was archaeological in nature, which I believe. There's megalith structures. You know, I can't always forget the British reporter turned archaeologist who did the show, who is now financing getting a LiDAR scans of the Amazon, seeing that there's evidence of vast civilizations. It makes sense to me because we know so little of really. You go back a couple thousand years, we know very little. So why wouldn't there have been civilizations on Earth? You know, Gene Roddenberry didn't believe in ancient aliens because he believed that we built the pyramids, that we figured all that stuff out. But there's a lot of stuff about the ancient world we just don't know. So I would like to believe that we have been visited, whether they're interdimensional beings, which I don't tend to believe, or aliens on the bottom of the ocean, or whatever. I am willing to entertain the idea that it's very possible that those things exist. I mean, I'll tell you something from my own personal experience. So, where I live out here in the Inland Empire, there are massive, like, Amazon warehouses. I mean, like giant, like square mile long buildings, giant warehouses, and you drive by them on the freeway. And there's a lot of them. On the 10 freeway here, you drive up the 10 freeway, you head out to the desert toward Palm Springs and all that, or you're on the 60, you're going to Moreno Valley or something. There are these giant, vast swaths of these giant warehouses. Anything could be in those warehouses. Like, you drive by them and you don't know, like, what's in them. You know, there's cars parked out there, but they're all these nondescript buildings. I mean, it would not surprise me that there's shit hiding in plain sight. Not at Area 51, but nobody. I mean, I drive by these buildings and I take notice of them, and my own imagination says they could be storing vast quantities of alien tech, and nobody would know. As a matter of fact, why not hide them there? Because no one's looking. People are driving by. Everyone's going to Area 51. You know, why would you? I mean, I would maintain a presence there just to fuck with people. But, you know, there was a report released. Why are there reports in India and Russia of strange sites at nuclear plants and weapons facilities? I don't know. But I want to believe. I've always wanted to believe. Look, I bought the Weekly World News hoping Bat Boy was real. I knew he wasn't, but I wanted him to be. Look up Bat Boy. How can you not look up Bat Boy and see that picture and go, look at that punum? I wish that Bat Boy was real. I mean, I would love to believe that aliens are out there, but, you know, I tend to. She's in Lou's Dark Forest theory. I don't know if you're fans of the three-body problem. Maybe that's not such a good thing, but who knows? So let's see. Terrier, who's been an imagination connoisseur for 38 months. Hello, Terrier. Thanks for that. Deez Webos says, did you ever listen to Art Bell? I love listening to Art Bell. I loved listening to Art Bell. Yeah. It was, up all night or whatever. Video Hunter D says, could you have a relationship with a smart ape? Okay, when you say like Zira and Cornelius, could I have a relationship with Zira? Sure. I mean, it might be a little difficult. I don't know if I'd want to go down on her, but I probably would. I don't know. It would really depend, because if you're like, here, I'll tell you something. This is going to seem weird. There is a Star Trek novel by a writer named Diane Duane called The Wounded Sky. And there's an alien creature. She's basically a crystalline spider. Ktilk is her name. That's how I was. Ktilk. And that's how it's like written, or Ktilk. But I always imagine it being sung like Ktilk. And so I always loved this character. And I was always thinking, I'm like, I wish I could meet a girl like that. Maybe not a crystalline spider, like somewhere, south of the crystalline spider from Krull. But I was like, I really like this character. And that's where the endless debate on this channel is. Could you make it with an alien? And I know it doesn't matter whether it's Octurian, baby, but we've talked about this. Like, what if you met an intelligent xenomorph and she just dazzled me? Could I go there? Probably not. Not a xenomorph. But an intelligent ape? Depends. Could I fall in love with an intelligent ape? I mean, I don't know. I've never had a relationship with, like, I wonder, and to be honest, to be fair, I've often wondered about this. If I met, like, I'm talking about not an alien, like if I met Starfire from the Teen Titans, like I was not that they, I'm talking about, Corindar, the from Tamaran, who has, because I love redheads, who has that red hair and that, that skin from the comics, George Perez, New Teen Titans. Oh yeah, I could go there. But if you met an alien creature that was look less humanoid, like an ape, could you fall in love with them? To be honest, in all honesty, I would love to one day face that. I would love to know that about myself. Like, could I love a truly alien being? Like, in a romantic way. I don't know if I could, to be honest. All joking aside. I don't know. But it's an interesting question. Because, there's that scene when Taylor says at the end of the first Planet of the Apes, I'd like to kiss you goodbye. And she looks at him and she says, but you're so damn ugly. There's a lot of truth there, I guess. Terrier says, even if space travel and living on alien planets was a thing, my ex-wife would still need help with trivial things like mowing her lawn. Weed factor 9. I'll mow her lawn. You seen those pictures of her lately? Good on her. But that's actually a good point, though. Yeah, I mean, you would need help with those trivial things. But Hunter Becknell says, Rob, do you ever watch Gar's show Forbidden Frontier? I've never seen Forbidden Frontier. I don't know it. 1001 Johnny says, bah humbug, Rob. I'll get you next time. Will you? I don't know. Charles Becerra says, I want to go all Captain Kirk on She-Hulk. Oh, I would totally go on She-Hulk. I'm not packing enough to satisfy She-Hulk, but I would go there. I would use my cunning linguist skills on her for hours on end. I would. At least I'd try, And Charles, this is your 20th super chat on the show, so thank you for that. Let me make sure I'm not missing anybody. Al Renshaw says, Leslie wants to make Knights of the Old Republic focusing on, is it Kriya? I don't want to get that wrong. Obviously, focus should be Revan. Amanda calling Star Wars gay frustrating and makes me not want to watch. Well, look, here's the funny thing about Star Wars. I mean, obviously, Star Wars is not the most sexually charged franchise in the world. And I think it's probably a good thing that it isn't. Because there's, when you bring in... My problem with... some things don't necessarily have to have a sexual component to them. But I understand the idea of that addressing that there are same-sex relationships, because there have been same-sex relationships with human beings since the beginning of time. That's part of it's part of our DNA for whatever reason. There are people that are born that way. It's been part of human history since time immemorial. So I don't have a problem. I don't necessarily object to any of that, but it depends what story paradigm that you're working in. Because look, I do think that I believe in things that are age appropriate. As much as I was a horny fourth grader, I don't think sexually explicit material is good for somebody who's 10 years old. I just don't. Because you have to develop into that. And part of your own development into those things is your own journey. And to have things forced into that when people aren't ready isn't good. And I think that's true of any idea, not just your sexuality or not just your politics or your religion. You have to be allowed to, and people should help you come into these things on your own. But part of that is self-exploration and understanding who and what you are. And I sought that stuff out because I was interested in it. I don't think it should be forced, because what you're doing is you're interfering with the normal growth of a human being. And a human being should be allowed, look, these days, you can find whatever you want. And if people are on their own personal journeys of exploration and growth, they themselves should be able to reach out and go out and find what it is they're looking for. And I don't think that things being forced on people is fair, especially when you're younger. You should find people, you should certainly be there to answer questions and offer guidance and counsel to young people. But to be pushing agendas onto young people during the development phase of their own lives, I don't think is fair. I also think it's dangerous. That said, make things available to people, but let them come to things in their own good time. I think that's the best way to focus. This, of course, coming from somebody who doesn't have kids of his own. So I'm talking out of my ass. But I would just think that for me personally, I saw a lot of shit when I was young, but I sought it out myself. And it worked for me. Scott Bartholomew says, any scuttlebutt about episode 1000? Only it's going to be 29 episodes from now. It's just, I wanted to get it done before we started the audio drama in earnest, so it's going to take me a while to get there. I apologize for that. So, don't know what to say about that, but yeah. Well, everybody, on that note, I think I've caught up with everybody about all of this, and talking about verisimilitude and talking about suspension of disbelief. Another great show. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank Brett for writing that letter, and I want to thank everybody for generously supporting this channel via super chats and tips. I like all the new members and new subscribers, so welcome to all of you. And as I'm working on the audio drama, I will try and do these shows as much as possible because I'm having fun doing them. But you know what? You didn't think I could leave. I have one more article. And if you've made it this far, why not read it? This was in Polygon today. Uh-oh. And, I don't know what I just did. I just did something bad. But I don't know if I should read this article. Maybe I should. Let's read it, shall we? Hey, remember, I'm going to read this article, but it's not me. I'm not bitching, but Polygon wrote this article. Let's delve into it, shall we? This is by Austin Goslin, and this was published yesterday at 9:45 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And if you haven't seen The Acolyte Season 3, tune out. Disney's Star Wars has a real follow-through problem. The Acolyte's silly rock fire in Episode 3 is a perfect symbol for its bigger problems. The Acolyte's third episode brought up a whole lot more questions than it answered. For instance, what's up with that Force cult? How were May and Osha born? Why are the Jedi here to begin with? Why is the dialogue so bad? And what actually happened in that fire? But the most important question of all is, how in the hell did all of that stone catch on fire? Talk about verisimilitude and believability. Of course, Star Wars is a series full of deep and complex lore. So here are our best attempts to explain exactly how a mountain caught on fire in the Acolyte. Note, one more time, this post contains spoilers for Star Wars The Acolyte Episode 3. And to be honest, this article, I've been saving it to get to this point, because if you're still here, this should be fun to get through. Talk about suspension of disbelief. Before we get into explanations, it's important that we go over the event in question a little bit first. The fire in the mountain on Brendock is the inciting incident for everything else that happens in the Acolyte. It's what separates May and Osha, and what gives both of them their diametrically opposed views on the Jedi. So when we got the flashback in Episode 3, it initially seemed like it might be a complex event, rife with childhood misunderstandings and misperspective. Maybe, from what Osha saw, it seemed like May created the fire, while May saw that it was some kind of Jedi accident leading to her hatred. Unfortunately, none of this is what actually happens in the episode. Instead, we see Kid May clearly and emotionlessly say that she would rather kill her sister herself than see her leave, then set the entire mountain temple on fire. While the events of that led up to the fire are pretty extreme disappointment, even if the show could just be using this inexplicable child murderer plot as a smokescreen for a later surprise, it's still somehow the fire itself that seems silliest. May takes Osha's sketchbook, lights up its pages using a lamp, and then throws it into the stone hallway, which promptly ignites like it's made of dry wood. Here's where we have to meet the show way more than halfway. Here's Theory 1, the alternate metal theory. Perhaps what looked like stone inside the mountain was actually a different material. While most of the temple we see on Brendock in the Acolyte's third episode appears to be carved straight into the mountain, maybe the Coven of Witches actually coated the interior tunnels of their home with some extremely flammable non-rock material. This is the silliest and most cop-out theory possible, but it is also a little bit of an old-school Star Wars explanation too. Just like setting fires in space or the scream of TIE fighters, it's something silly and fun that defies all explanations of earthly science, and that's fine. Of course, this would be a little easier to stomach if the Acolyte were taking itself a little less seriously, and if the fire in question didn't leave so many of the people involved paralyzed with guilt, full of regret, dead set on vengeance, or simply dead altogether. Silly problems are great to meet with silly answers, but tragedies deserve something a little more thought out. Theory 2, the hidden culprit theory. This theory revolves around the idea that what we saw in Episode 3 was only part of the story. Sure, May made a childish, rash assertion that she wanted to kill her sister, but her sketchbook fire should have simply fizzled out, except that another perpetrator used the Force to spread the flames. The most likely outcome of a theory like this would be that someone from May and Osha's coven fanned the flames to try and get the girls out and blame the Jedi. The culprit here probably would be the Zabrak witch, who seemed to be having a bit of a power struggle with the twins' mom. Perhaps she's stronger and more dangerous than she appeared and simply decided that destroying the coven's home and splitting up May and Osha would be the witch's only path forward. She could even be the dark figure training May in the future and tasking her with killing the Jedi, who visited Brendock. An even more exciting version of this theory, however, is that all this destruction was caused by the Jedi all along. May, despite her horrific proclamation that she was going to murder the only other child she'd ever known, was mostly blameless and was instead set up and left to die by a band of Jedi desperate to get their hands on a promising new recruit. This would be genuinely shocking. Not out of line entirely with the dark edges lurking around the Jedi in Star Wars canon. After all, how do they get all those youngling recruits? But still more gutsy and interesting than almost anything we've seen of them on screen. Making the Jedi the true villains of the Brendock fire would mark a meaningful indictment of the High Republic Jedi, an example of them determining themselves to be judge, jury, and executioner for this extremist outlier cult. Just because they determined the cult to be wrong, they massacred everyone there and attempted to steal both children, but when even that proved too difficult, they simply took one and left the other to die. Even in spite of what would be the show's silly attempt at misdirection, and its often frustratingly wooden dialogue or samey characters, this reveal would be a genuinely exciting one, a real daring stance on a certain era of Jedi history that, at least in some sectors of the galaxy, was far darker than we'd ever thought possible. Theory 3. The Disney's Star Wars Theory. The third theory is the simplest of all. The Acolyte is simply a deeply unserious show, interested in saying something new about the Jedi, the Force, or the Star Wars universe more broadly, but too concerned with appearances to get the details right, both in terms of storytelling and lore. This theory suggests that there's no more to the events than we saw on screen. May lit a fire in an attempt to kill her sister. It got bigger than she thought and had far-reaching consequences that she blames on the Jedi while shirking her own part in it. With this theory, even if the Jedi did a few things wrong, it would still wash out, with most of them being heroic in the end, leaving everything basically in the same place it started. On paper, this theory would be a profound disappointment. In practice, however, it just feels like what we should expect from most modern Star Wars stories. These projects rarely have the guts to really shake up the franchise and introduce something truly shocking, instead always bringing the status quo back at the end or simply pushing toward events we already know the outcome of. Star Wars is firmly in an era of stagnation, so hoping for something fun, interesting, or daring out of a very silly-looking fire, even if it's set in a totally new time period, is probably a little more than we should expect from the series at this point. Instead, it's hard not to imagine that the Acolyte's biggest moment so far is nothing more than rock that inexplicably caught fire because the plot needed it to. I had to save that for the end in case anybody was still here. Rock's on fire. Suspension of disbelief? Or not? The Acolyte? Do you believe it? Or not? Have you suspended your disbelief, or are you in total disbelief over how Disney has handled the Star Wars franchise up to this point? Rise of Skywalker makes me not believe. I'll tell you that. What do you guys think? I'd love to know. And on that note, I want to thank my moderating staff, people like Tom Jr. Jackson. I don't know if Tom Jr. Jackson is here. Darth Plato is here. I do have a letter he wrote that I keep forgetting to read, but Darth Plato, I still have it, and I'm going to read it. Tom Jr. Jackson is here. So thank you guys for being the moderators that you are. Darth Plato is the official historian of this channel. And of course, Tom Jr. Jackson reminds everyone that we are all goof people. And on that note, I'm going to go back to the world of the 1930s and Nathan Heller. And you're going to go there soon, too. And I can't wait to take you along with the cast that we have assembled for this adventure. Hopefully it's the first of many. Hopefully I can count on your support. So thank you all for being here. I really appreciate your support and continuing patronage and just hanging out and having fun. What do you think is important when it comes to suspension of disbelief? Do you care? Write down there in the comments and tell me what you think. And remember, the Force will be with you. Always. And every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen.